Well, welcome everyone to our consumerism panel. We're really excited to have you all here today and to have our wonderful panelists that are going to be addressing this very meaty and energizing topic. So we're excited to have you all here. I'm curious if there's anyone in the room that is a provider and is a customer of one of these vendors up here. Okay, I see a couple of you. Wonderful.
Planted them, you know?
Yeah, I like this. This was good planning.
Public body blows.
Yes,
Yeah.
So we'll be looking to you guys for your experience as well. Well, let's do some quick introductions of the folks we have up here. First of all, I'm Rebecca Hammond. I run the consulting services at Class Research. I'm excited to be here with you today. And then we have Adnan Iqbal, who's the CEO of Luma Health. We have Todd Strickler, who's the SVP at Get Well Network. And we have Ben Albert, CEO and co-founder at Upfront Healthcare, and Tim Wilson, the CFO at Quill. We're so excited to have you guys here today. So as we start to dig in and have talked about the things that we want to talk about, I mean, right out of the gate, we got a big meaty question that we could spend a lot of time on. And so we can hear your question as well. So to start out, we really want to talk about what is driving the investment, the energy in consumerism and healthcare right now. There's a lot of factors at play here, and I'd love to hear from your perspectives where you're feeling that impact and where you feel like you can come and address that energy. So anybody want to kick us off before I start picking on you? Okay, Adnan.
So, yeah, I think that yesterday and today have really highlighted all the core themes, right? There's this, I was here 2 years ago, we were still diagnosing a lot of the challenges. And I think we've seen over the past 2 years that there's been tectonic shifts that are really forcing healthcare as a whole, delivery systems in particular, to really think about how to leverage technology in a more thoughtful way. And everyone here, Dr. Yaz shared her story later this morning. Adam showed his story yesterday, and it's we want to have a seamless experience with the patient at the center of it. Consumerism, like so all the things all of us nod and agree to, right? There's no disagreement, and I think that the big shift, what's driving the investment, is really kind of, I'd say, tectonic shift, which is increased competitions, folks really focusing on and clearly articulating growth plans that require a harmonized end-to-end patient experience, right? Having band-aids and point solutions that have been okay in the past, that barely talk to the EHR, definitely won't talk to each other. Folks are now stepping back and saying, hey, how do we actually deliver a harmonized experience? How do we think about unifying and automating all patient journeys, not just operational or clinical or financial experience? I think that's what we see, what we hear from health systems, clinics, hospitals all across the country is this is real for us now, and the world has changed, especially from a competitive dynamic and a growth standpoint.
Yeah, I would 100% yes and that from the competitive perspective. We could probably argue about the cause and effect of was it the investment that drove increased consumerism or the opportunity or vice versa or some combination thereof. But when I really think about consumerism, that patient experience, it's a really opaque, not so great process in our lives. So all of us as patients at one point or another in our lives or in the future, it's just not a consistent great experience. So I think just that being and knowing how we operate through the world, everyone feels that there's a disconnect, and I think that's driven a lot of competition. Providers feeling like they're going to get disintermediated with clinics or other upstarts changing their business models. Payers the same thing, and I would even say for potentially some of us, right, like you're not getting that right fit for your customers. The competition is going to drive you out of it.
Yeah, I would say I'll take a sidestep. So I've now joined the healthcare industry. I've been in this space for a year now. My background before that was at Marriott, leading their digital transformation around the travel journey, and then launching a company called ISIS. We had changed names for the obvious reason, Softcard. That was the first mobile wallet in the US, so Apple Pay to be today. And then before that, at Verizon launching the first set of wireless data services. And I think when I think of consumerism, I think, well, it's the consumer is already there. It's just realizing and recognizing that fact. And the data points I share with clients are that 96% of US adults have a cell phone today. 80% of US adults have a smartphone. So that means that 80% of the adult population has a computer in their pocket. And that changes the dynamic. And their expectations kind of go up with whoever pushes that on the envelope. Uber is 10 years old, not even that old. But their business is all based off the fact of, oh, there's a computer in everybody's pocket, so e-commerce can go anywhere you want it to be. And so that sets the stage for this conversation. And COVID is the great forcing function, because it literally forced a digital virtual experience in many cases, because there was no way you could get people into physical facilities. So that's the awakening moment that leads to a lot of these things coming together. I know been talked about for a while, but you can see where they now come to a head, and you're like, oh, this is the reality of the world today, and it will keep pushing in this direction.
I'd say that consumerism is massive. There's so many different sectors of consumerism alone. To say what's driving investment in overall consumerism is pretty difficult, but I would state that the retailization of healthcare is driving consumerism across healthcare. So as you add more retail types of services that are attracting more and more patients and doing that more transactional care delivery on the retail side, it's forcing the industry to move to a much more consumer first approach, whether that's a health system trying to compete with the retailization or others trying to compete with that. So I think that was the forcing function as retailization and digital care for many new players came into the market, forced the market to move forward. And then from an investor perspective, of course, then they see that and say who's going to win. So start looking at the companies involved and writing big checks to help support those companies. They're going to help move the market.
Yeah, just to add to the point there that when we talk to delivery systems now, we ask them who their biggest competitor is. Stanford in the past say it's UCSF, right? They don't longer say that. They say it's Optum, it's Walmart, it's Amazon, and they really worry about the Walmart and the retail side of things gobbling up their primary care lead flow, right? And patients, people, all of us as people, just demanding a better experience, right? Which only becomes relevant to, I think, healthcare. The incentives are aligned, and that's like, hey, well, now people don't have a choice to go somewhere else. They do have a choice to go somewhere else. They don't only have to come to us.
So I'm curious for the providers in the room and those that have had kind of lived this, have you felt that competition, that retailization? Have you felt that and feel like you are needing to pivot? And what does that experience look like for you guys? I think we lost one of our providers. JD, that leaves you.
Yeah. Thank you.
And how are you guys addressing that currently?
Well, so we use Get Well for the inpatient side, and then we use Well Health for a texting platform, integrated with Epic, and try to get everything we can out of Epic MyChart.
What would you say are the biggest stumbling blocks for your patients as you're standing up this technology to help address this problem?
So I left one part out, which is that you're not on MyChart yet. Initial digital front door stuff, right? And that's where the sophisticated provider directories come in. That's an area we're a little behind on, actually. So, but that's an important component. So basically 2 categories of patients. They're not yet on your patient portal. If they are on your patient portal, you need to maximize that experience. And when you look at Epic World, Epic is rolling out new features in MyChart so fast, like nobody can even keep up with just implementing what Epic's coming out. So a lot of Epic CIOs are a little cautious about adding bolt-ons. It's something that Epic's going to do 3 months from now. For the not yet on your patient portal, It's, you know, it's open scheduling, it's sophisticated search, so I can type in a diagnosis and misspell it and find the doc that actually does that. Yeah, those are all the things that everyone's trying to do. So.
Well, thanks for letting us put you on the spot. Appreciate it. So as we are looking at, you know, all of these different paths that you can really take to address the explosion in energy around creating this end-to-end experience, thinking of the patient as a consumer, what would you say, and Todd, let's start with you on this one. What would you say is really the value proposition for providers to get on board with what you have to offer in terms of helping them address this?
I think the value prop is related to the activation engagement of a person in the process of their care. And while that sounds like a simple and basic one, it is sometimes overlooked. And this is something I shared in one of our morning sessions, that it often starts with a mindset of where you're starting and orienting to that value prop that determines how much you create resonance with that person to want to actively get involved. And the mindset, if it starts from a clinical perspective, sometimes ends up in the efficiency kind of corridor. And that efficiency is super important because of how multifaceted the service of healthcare can be. But to a person going through it, like they're assuming you're providing that, and to them it's not an episode, it's a service. And so they're often looking for things that are very easy to run past. So some things that I try and surface with folks and we're working on to help improve is, hey, you know what's important to a person going through something, especially when they're not there with their loved one? Are they out of surgery or not? Like, that's a really meaningful bit of information that is often overlooked going through the clinical workflows, because there's so much involved in getting a patient from step A to B. And sometimes the systems don't provide it. That's a different issue. But that mindset gets you to recognize that that's an important activation moment to get somebody back involved and engaged at the point that it could be helpful. And then to better appreciate the service that's being rendered, to view it in a different way. And that mindset starts you thinking that way, to start identifying where those opportunities live from a consumer-driven type of mindset.
Yeah, from a quote perspective, we're not that far apart, although I've never met Todd. But you know, when I think about the retailization and the lead gen flow, just general value props, especially for providers, you know, there's kind of that front of the funnel, you know, revenue attribution. Quill, we start, you know, similarly at the point of care, and that's really around, you know, the belief we say, hey, to be a customer at Quill, you need to believe that an educated and engaged patient provides for better outcomes. So we started that clinical point of care, and we say, hey, nearly every person going through, or hopefully every person going through, this is a new experience for them. And so many of our consumer experiences, we've learned over time how to operate in those experiences. But hopefully for all of us, health experiences are novel, unique, and not, you know, all that recurring outside of, you know, some chronic conditions. So having expectation setting, activating, engaging, you know, Todd, your anecdote just around, hey, you're out of surgery, just providing insight into the process, we find, you know, goes a long way in helping people comply to their care plans. Just showing them, hey, here's where you are today. Here's where we want you to be tomorrow. In a month, 60, 90 days from now, here's kind of generally where you will be if you follow all these steps. Huge anxiety reductions, you know, preventing ER readmissions, all the things you would say.
Yeah, I think activation is important. And I think that's where we heard Dr. Bart yesterday talk about, it's not just the digital front door, it's the digital journey. So activation at the onset, but how do you nurture, acquire, guide, and then retain a patient, right? People don't want to, all of us people don't want to be engaged. Like, it's kind of a crappy word, right? Don't engage me, help me and guide me get to the outcome that, you know, needing to see a doctor sucks, but getting to care shouldn't. And unfortunately, it often does. The phone tree from hell experience, right? For a patient who needs a stress test, like, ooh, double whammy. I think the ROI parameters are clear for providers, that it's one, is this going to allow my patients to get to the desired health outcome? Two, is this going to help me drive revenue, whether that's revenue growth, defend against competition, enable strategic growth, or new service lines. And then is there going to be efficiency here? Can I do more with less, whether it's less people or less humans? And I think what we hear from health systems is, one, I need to now start thinking about the entire journey, not point solutions. I need to do less. I need to do more with less partners or vendors or tools. And then think about delivering more workflows, right? So the patient-clinician interaction, the patient-staff interaction, the patient, the financial interaction, they need to solve for workflows. Two is really around leveraging my existing infrastructures, systems more effectively, my Epic, my CRM, my revenue cycle management, what have you. And then three, I think always just comes down to, is this going to be harmonized? Like, I don't want to be hitting people with all these different sorts of digital tools and engagement and activation. I need to be able to harmonize it because it's confusing for me as someone overseeing workflow. How confusing must it be for my patient who's going from provider to provider, service line to service line, et cetera.
So I struggle with the distinction between consumer and patient. Frankly, the fact that a consumer is probably, in our world, an uninitiated patient who might not have a portal account, is new to the equation and it's going through a front door and trying to enable it. And then you've got a patient, they're attributed to your organization and you're trying to manage that patient through their care effectively. And so there's differences. I mean, there's patient engagement, there's consumer engagement, there's differences related to how you would approach each of those functions. And so when we think about it at upfront, we think about patient engagement. We're thinking about how do you guide every single patient to the care they need across the system, regardless of the way in which they get it, whether it's integrated humans and digital. But human and digital has to be integrated. Analog and digital has to be integrated. One stream of communication to a patient, enabling them to get to the care that they need, personalized in a way that they can understand, in the health literate way that they can understand it. It really distills down to initiate and respond. What are you going to initiate for the patient to do? And how are you as a system going to respond? If you initiate in a personalized way with the capability and the support and the response capacity, you're going to enable them to get the care they need. If you initiate without a response capacity, they're going to sit on a hold, they're going to sit for 15 minutes, they're not going to get the appointment booked because access is terrible, whatever the case may be. You're just not balancing initiate and response. And if you can balance initiate and response for patients, especially patient engagement, you're going to enable that transformed patient experience across the system.
So as we look at the market today, and as organizations are adopting these solutions and putting these solutions into the hands of their patients, what does the chasm look like in terms of the general market versus, say, your most advanced customers? And I'm curious if you could walk through what are those gaps and what are some of your advanced customers? Where are they on their journey in terms of what they've been able to accomplish? And Ben, let's start with you.
Sure. I'll say that the funny part is some of our most advanced customers don't think they're advanced. They sit down and they really look themselves in the mirror and they think, wow, everybody else is so far ahead of us. They're all doing this. But the fact is we work with a lot of enterprise health systems and they're not. Everybody is struggling with this. So we have kind of a 4-phase tier of where you are. And it almost follows the path of like a centralized call center. There's no such thing as a centralized call center in healthcare, at least that we've seen, although lots of folks talk about how that is a centralized function. The fact is that it all has to come together. And where they are on that journey is mapping back to how digital, again, digital and analog are harmonized, it's a good word, or and unified, so that the patient can get a single stream of communication enabling their care. And so I'd say our most advanced customers have really done the hard work internally to identify who owns certain parts of that journey, who owns digital experience, who owns the analog experience, and how do those two work together? If those two work really well together in a health system, you're going to move the needle. If those two have different approaches, then you're going to struggle to move the needle because you're going to fragment the experience because they're going to both put in solutions that we talked about, and you're going to have point solutions all over the place. So that our most advanced have done the hard work internally to get there, and then we can create a seamless experience for patients and proactively engage them and navigate them to the care that they need.
I think you actually said it pretty well. I think there are I think further echoing what you're saying, like the ones that are more advanced are the ones that actually say that they're the furthest behind, and those that feel like they're there already are often have a little bit further to go. And I keep coming back to the mindset. And what I try and get people as a thought starter on that to help then start orienting around a consumer that may not be in a patient or an ongoing relationship. Like, how well are you set up to earn the privilege to serve that person? Because they're not obligated to come back to you. And in the case of a multifaceted service experience, you might go through in a care episode, like they may be a quarter of the way through and be like, man, I'm just not getting the help I need. I need a second opinion. I need to get to another place to go get the service that I'm looking for. And so when you start taking that mindset, you say, you know what, that service line needs to be brought a little bit closer. Now I got to deal with the change dynamic of certain leaders within the system that maybe aren't lined up with it. Maybe this is a part of our system we need to focus on really improving the experience and start adding to that your satisfaction measures from a consumer lens and a patient lens in their terms that you marry then with your revenue and cost and safety and efficiency measures, and just start using that as a way to drive a thought process that says, oh, I actually do need to bring the patient into this. And what I've used is sometimes a construct and an idea that Amazon is very famous for this, but others have applied it in different ways of getting even within meetings to call out an empty chair in the room and say, that's where the patient will be sitting in this room. How do you think they would respond to us talking about this? And start catching yourself at the first moment you start trading off for the patient in that equation, which is often earlier than you think in the process, because you say, well, this is easier. This is going to be a little bit more straightforward for us to do this, to start bringing that mindset to places that help you say, okay, these would be improvement areas that we can go after.
I'm a biologist, so I was thinking axes. I'd say there's two axes. I agree with everything both of you shared. There's where you are in terms of the continuum of, are you trying to solve for pain points, or do you have a clear strategy that you're trying to enable, right? So where you are on that spectrum. And then the second axis would really be where you are on when you purchased your EHR, right? So if you just bought Epic, you're drinking Judy's Kool-Aid hard, right? So you're Epic first all day, every day. Usually about 18 months, you start to step back and say, okay, these are workflows I need to enable. These are things I need to allow to achieve my strategy. I need to think about what I'm going to build on top or integrate with my EHR investment. So those are two axes. And I think to the point you made in terms of that empty seat, Banner Health's a great example, right? They will not claim they're advanced, but they are advanced in that they think of how do we orchestrate Patient Sophia? Patient Sophia could be any one of us, end-to-end journey, right? And so when IT saying no to everything, because that's what IT likes to do, then they'll ask like, well, how do we think about Patient Sophia and her experience, or the experience for her kids who she's coordinating care for? And that allows them to step back and center around like, okay, what are the right workflows? What are the right pieces of technology? And what's the right level of integration that we need to think through? Franciscan, another good example of an organization moving from solving for pain points to having a very clear strategy and thinking about what's the right technology to allow us to achieve those strategic goals. So those are, I'd say, some axis-ized ways to think about where organizations are on their own digital transformation journey.
Yeah, I'm really racking my brain. I'm trying to think of something to disagree with here to liven it up a little bit. But I love the pain point versus strategy. I would say the chasm is less. There's generally a willingness to invest to solve this problem on behalf of all of our customers. So there's definitely a will. But the ones that we see do it best, have that coordination between, say, a chief nursing officer, a CMIO, or a CIO, and their service line heads, where those pain points are getting escalated and they're participating in this joint strategic process, rather than saying, well, I run my service line or I have my budget. I'm just going to go do this thing and we'll worry about integration later. And then, in next year's budget cycle, I'm going to lay this at the feet of my CIO and say, hey, you got to integrate this. Look at these great results we got from this point solution. Of course, we have to keep using this. We can't stop using it. So that's, I would say, the day in, day out battle that we even have just, as a vendor, as a platform sale to providers saying, okay, well, we can do this across all departments, but we also have to win against, just that niche solution. So the customers we like working with best obviously have, that partnership and arrangement where, they can think strategically together. They're getting pain points solved, but within a larger strategy.
Here's a provocation. The ones who think they're often the most advanced want to build them themselves.
Yeah.
And that's never a good idea, right?
That's
And if
fair.
they looked at the banners, the UCSFs, the Fairviews who came before, who tried to build themselves 5 or 10 years ago, like when you're super advanced or think you're advanced, you're like, well, I should just do this all myself.
Yeah,
and
we all-
actually, it's a great point. And while this might sound self-serving to us, it's actually not. And I've seen this from, I'll go out of band and experience working with big companies like Marriott and Verizon that go through a constant transformation process and have massive, like Verizon more than others I've worked with, massive portfolios investments. They also are very strategic in saying, we cannot build this all ourselves because of time.
Yeah.
Because the time it takes to put all of the capabilities in place, if you do it yourself, is ultimately longer than the speed at which the market is moving for transforming the experience to where the bar is set. And so that's why you want to get the right partners that are saying the same thing that you are, so you can go faster. Because if you build it all yourself, you're going to constrain how fast you can ultimately go, when you can leverage an ecosystem to get you there much faster and more effectively, and frankly harness some ideas that are outside of your purview that may help clarify some areas that say that's where we need to lean in a different way.
Yeah.
It's impact for patients.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. The number of times, you sit down and, hey, it's on next year's roadmap. And then next year comes around. All of a sudden I got bumped to next year's, like it's always next year's roadmap. And just, yeah,
I
it
feel
gets
like providers are
deprioritized.
getting much better at that though.
Yeah,
As a
yeah.
whole, they're not trying to build nearly as much as they once did, at least in our experience, just because they've had those problems.
And I think to that point, you made the comments about Epic. What I shared more as an out of industry example is that's actually a super important and strategic investment, and it's not enough. Like that enables you to create some of the underlying integrated workflows that you really need to deliver within your system, the kind of integrated experience that needs to underpin. But then you need the part that activates the patient within that. It's not unlike if you deal with, and I speak to my Verizon days in the past, where you could tell that the billing system was the thing spitting out the thing that you're getting in the mail. And you're like, hey, I need help on this. I don't know what this charge is. And they're like, well, that's basically what our billing system told you. And you're like, crap, I need to switch providers because this sucks. So that's the mindset that a lot of companies have gone towards, is saying, let's let those systems do what they need to so we can critically scale our operation. Let's make sure we transform around the experiences that we need to create so that people love us. We don't own them. We earn the privilege to serve, so that we show leadership and they say, that is where I want to get my service, not because I have to, but because I really want to.
And from a class research perspective, as we speak to providers and gather their experiences, you certainly see power and strength in that level of partnership, where they feel like they are committed and deeply involved in building that vision together, creates alignment between the vendor and the provider for them to be able to really drive success. But there's also pitfalls to that, where you have providers that are maybe on the outside of that partnership that aren't benefiting from the work that's happening. So how does that translate to benefit the broader whole? So there's certainly some barriers to overcome through that for the broader customer base. But I want to come back to this thought around this empty chair that represents the patient, because I think it's a beautiful visual, and we talk about having this patient at the center. And so I'm curious, as you're working with your provider organizations, your customers, what does your current plan look like? Do you have a plan or kind of current things in operation right now that involve the end consumer, that involve the patient? Where is their voice in the development? Is it channeled exclusively through provider organizations? Are there other things that you're doing to really get to that end patient experience? Adnan, let's start with you.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's such an important voice, and it often gets overlooked when you think about workflows and systems and change management. I'll use a real example. I think we heard elements of it in the previous panel around the patient financial journey, because often the patient financial journey has been like this afterthought for a lot of folks, right? It's like, it's back office, this thing that happens. Well, we as people, we now make more and more healthcare decisions based on cost, convenience, and then the actual healthcare need, right? And Walmart's always going to beat us, any one of us, right, on convenience. I don't know the stat off the top of my head, but 70% of Americans live within like 5 miles of a Walmart. It's something to that effect, right? So the financial journey is important. We could do everything perfectly, solve for access, solve for pre-appointment communication, so the patient knows, I'm trying to get to this appointment, I need to park here, and you bring this, give the clinical guidance, don't wear deodorant for your screening mammogram, right? You get the intake done, like everything is seamless. patient self-scheduled, it's perfect. And then the patient shows up at the imaging facility and they get told, you have a $750 out-of-pocket cost, right? And the patient walks out the door, right? And so that should be manifested earlier in the patient journey. And this we learned directly from hearing this from patients. They're like, love it, this is awesome, I feel empowered, I own my data, but I often can't avail the services because I don't know about it until like actually the point of care. So how do you help them understand their expected out-of-pocket cost? How do we bring in prior auth earlier into the scheduling flow so you get the people to the right appointment and don't waste their time on a lot of back and forth and having to play phone tag, et cetera. So that's one area where I think that unifying journeys, right? Operational, clinical, those make a lot of sense, but pulling in financial, that's really from the patient voice.
So we do two things. We work with our clients with their patient and family advisory councils. So one of the first things I ask if we can participate in the work they do to be customer driven as well, and really try and hear the voice of the patient that way. We also do our own from a user-driven perspective. So this is, again, probably maybe a little bit more out of industry, although healthcare does this too, for sure. Really trying to get into the seat of the patient. I'll admit it's been hard for me as a newbie to healthcare over the last year, particularly in a hospital setting, to like get into a hospital and see what's going on. But it's a dramatically different thing when you're in the moments of care where it matters most, or where you're trying to activate and do certain things that will ultimately drive out a number of different things, features, functions, workflows, integrations that make a lot more sense, because in that context, you're like, oh, that's a crazy need. That's not going to immediately be apparent when you're creating your general hypotheses. You're like, well, the patient generally wants this. So the closer you can get to the point of somebody actually consuming a service and be able to objectively observe it using a lot of UX and design related types of approaches, that's helpful. And so we try and do with our customers and with ourselves directly from a user-driven perspective, just using and touching and feeling some of the things that we've got. I would love to. That is on my list, so we will absolutely get that scheduled.
I think from upfront healthcare's point of view is we do engage with a lot of patients. We're also all patients ourselves. We do a ton of at our town halls talking about family experiences, patient experiences. You know, my dad has leukemia, my dad has Parkinson's. We talk a lot about those types of experiences and how every patient can be guided. Every patient, vision impaired patients, they can't read the text message. So how are we guiding those patients? Patients who don't know much about the healthcare system and need more education. How can we guide those patients? So it's not just like one patient panel that can solve this problem. You need to have an understanding of all of the patients if you truly want to get this at scale. And so we try and create a very well-rounded approach to understanding what each patient needs through different modalities and tactics to do so. User experience, using analytics to understand who's engaging with our platform when, how often they're engaging, what time of day they're engaging, things like that, that help lead us to water. Because in our view, you have to go to the patient with a point of view. Asking them open-ended questions gets you open-ended answers. And so for us, we're really trying to figure out what our point of view is first, engage our patients, understand how they react to that, alter our point of view when the patient shares with us something that is misaligned to where we were headed, and continuously improve and iterate with those patients until for each set of patients, we're able to deliver to them a very elegant experience that guides them to the care that they need. And it's pretty foundational. Just what care does this patient need? How do we enable them to get that care? What do we need to communicate to them? And how will they digest that information? Each box, we try and get the patient involved.
One thing that you said triggered that is an insight, I think, for healthcare more than other industries, is that when you say patient, even that's almost too general and generic, because the person and the disease and the coordinates, you can map it better than I can, are so disparate that there's really hundreds of kind of segments that you're talking about to create optimal experiences. And it's something that for some clients I get into talking to, that you may actually tune towards certain populations that you're serving more than others and make sure it's great for them, where others it's really good. But to get it covered for everybody, like that is something that is super tricky in healthcare.
It has to be done. And every patient needs to be guided. So it doesn't matter if it's a phone call, doesn't matter. Every patient needs to be guided. So
It all starts with access, right? And if you can't solve for access and you can't go do all the other things you want to go do.
I don't agree. I don't think it starts. I think it starts with proactive communication. You have access. You're letting the patients drive how the access is used. You can
I
proactively
disagree.
engage.
I
You can
disagree.
proactively engage with patients.
That's part of access. Like if you're not proactively, if you're waiting for people to come to you, that's not access. But you got to get a hold of them.
Why
And
is
you
it
got to
not
find the
access?
panel where they are, find the patient where they are, on the channel that works best. I mean, the language that works best for them,
Sure.
right? And so that has to be true for everyone because we've seen over the past 18 months, telehealth has been an experiment that everyone's run. Telehealth inequity is a big thing. So you can have technology, you can have the slots, but if you don't have the mindset to think about, I need to deliver access for all patients, not
course.
just subset of patients, it's one and the same.
I want to come back to this thought about the proactive communication. So what, if I'm understanding correctly, you're saying everyone has access through their phone, their technology, if they're on the software, but the proactive communication to then engage them into the existing.
No, what I'm saying
Product?
is, and maybe I'll get booed off the stage, so be careful. What I'm saying is health systems, they have access. Sure, sometimes it takes 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 24 weeks to get in to see someone or longer. If you think about it as letting that access own you, as opposed to saying what patients need the access the most and how I take that access that I do have to them, I can help and prioritize and enable those patients to get the care that they need, rather than waiting for all of the patients to come to me and call and book all of the slots. And then I have no access for those patients who need the care. And then we're all using the back channels that we need to use to make the phone calls that we need to make to get someone in. So how can you flip it on its head a little bit to use the access that you have more proactively in order to enable those patients that need that access, rather than the ones that are coming to you all the time with that access? So that's what I'm saying. I mean, obviously there's a lot of nuance to that and a lot of scale to that to make it happen. But I think that access can be used strategically.
I think Ben and I get to hug here. We're saying the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
What he's calling access, I call capacity, right? And you don't capacity uses without the ability to effectively get people to that capacity. So we're friends again.
That's it.
Oh, I'm so glad.
That's a problem in healthcare. We all use the same words differently. Yeah.
That is actually a very big problem in healthcare. But that's not what this session is about.
No, okay.
Tim, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I was just, I love the energy there. So starting maybe after access, you're in the system, at least how we think about, patient feedback, a lot of the same things. We're all patients, we're all users, we navigate. For us, it does come down to personalization. So how am I speaking to that individual based on any number of factors? And that's the beauty of digital. And really the power of digital is you don't have to wait, and you don't have to create like some patient panel 6 months down the line and have a think tank. There's so much you can do real time through A/B testing and seeking feedback. I love directed feedback, especially. We still sometimes ask for open feedback. I was having lunch with someone else and we bonded over the fact that we hear, in our platform, gripes about parking all the time. We haven't, we're not trying to help you with parking. We're trying to help you adhere to your clinical care plan. So, it is interesting anywhere, an individual can give feedback. Generally, they will. Oftentimes, I think because it's so hard to route and get there. So we're constantly trying to get all of that in and work with our customer partners and say, hey, here's what we're doing to improve our relationship. Here's what else we're hearing generally from the patients that are going through your system that are tools or capabilities that are beyond what we are offering.
One more question, and then we'd love to open it up if we have time for questions from the group. But as you look at the current state, we talked about the chasm of the spectrum of customers that you have. Thinking about those that maybe haven't yet progressed looking towards solutions, what are the biggest barriers that you're seeing for your clients and customers to actually adopt some patient improvement initiatives for their organizations? And how do you help them address those?
Well, I'll make a plug for Dr. Ya, actually. And it reiterates the point I was making around mindset. That what her talk this morning, I hope everybody gets a chance to see that if they didn't get to see it already, really highlighted is being able to step back and try and walk a mile in the patient shoes for the place you're looking at to make improvements, and to make sure you're looking at the whole elephant. And you'll start to identify very quickly certain opportunities, half of which don't even require technology, but might be a different orientation to the task at hand. Just start elevating service. And there was actually a pretty cool moment in the morning when we had a roundtable that actually one of the people at our table said, "Small world." She was actually providing service to one of my kids like several years ago. And that's what he said, is like, it was such a great service. So call out, you know, great work. But that mindset really starts to open up different avenues that then tech can enable it and take it to the next level. But that starts to create a bit of a snowball of, hey, this is what we can do to improve our service, which now leads to other opportunities that spreads to word of mouth and other kinds of things. And then says, okay, how can we take it up a level from here?
Yeah, at least it's a little bit to what we were saying before, from what we are seeing in the market. It's the strategic versus pain point trade-off and the desire for an ROI on a pretty short duration. So there is sometimes, a belief or having to show things. And I do think there's some fatigue around hearing, that you're going to move all the same needles that everyone else is moving, and that the clinician actually doesn't do anything. It's just these digital tools around them that actually change outcomes. So I think, the space being crowded for a company that's early like Quill is, makes it difficult to be heard, because, there are all those same value levers that you're trying to pull. But even just beyond that, it's, where's the decision-making authority? What does the long-term partnership look like? What are expectations around ROI, immediacy versus long-term? And how do you develop a path to get there together? And every customer is unique, and where they care about being strategic versus solving a pain point differs.
I just got one thing to add. Yeah, I do. I think for those that are struggling to move forward, it's got to bring operations into it. Oftentimes, digital health's over here, operations is over here. The ROI usually accrues to operations. You want to drive ROI for an operational unit that you can then start to transform the digital experience through. So oftentimes we see strategy disconnected from operations, creating a difficulty in deploying something. And then there's vendor fatigue, because strategy is looking at all of us and everybody else, bringing them in without operations support. And so then it becomes this cycle of vendor fatigue / not enough pilot hell, that kind of thing. So how do you bring those two together to drive ROI, and then figure out how to deploy that platform, and then you'll start expanding into the other stuff.
We have a question up here.
So how many of us truly sell our software to the customer? What I mean by that is, how many of our patients experience this software by themselves without going through a health system? Anybody in the room can say, I do that. You know who does it? It's Google, it's Apple, and it's Microsoft. The healthcare industry today does not deliver software to the consumer directly at all. But we want the consumer to do all these things. We want the health system wants the patients to do all these things. The vendors want the patients to do all these things. The payer wants the members to do all these things. But nobody ever built software to look at it that if I was going through this experience, why would I not say, here is a free software, use it? When Google made search, Google didn't create a situation where I'm going to go and sell it to Franciscan Health because they want to allow their patients to search better. No. Google said, we give you a search capability, go do it. Google didn't go and sell it to the restaurants. The restaurants became the fear that if they were not on Google Analytics, they would be left out. Google Maps. Maps were created by Google. Patients use maps, but patients said, never said this is what we want. So do we have somebody that's thinking, I'm going to give this for free. It doesn't matter if I make money on it or not, but I'm going to give it to the patients. Let the patients go figure this out. And as they figure it out, I will build them these solutions in a way that makes sense. We've got 4 health systems, community, Franciscan, ourselves, IU, maybe one more extension. But if I was a patient sitting in Indianapolis, which is where I come from, I am clueless. I got so much software, I got so much hardware, I got so much iPads, I got every possible gadget in my home possible talking to me, but nothing will tell me the best provider I need to get care for, the cost it will take to get that care for, and how far it is from my house. Those are the 3 things I, as a consumer, want. Anybody think about that?
About 10 years ago, there was personal health records, right? So vendors actually tried that exact thing with personal health records, and it was sold to the patient or with the patient in mind. But why did it fail? Because the health systems would not participate with the patient. So yes, we've tried that 10 years ago, and hopefully we come full circle again to exactly what you're saying. But until the health systems stop being competitive with each other and start saying we're all patient-centric and human-centric, and we all say we are, but we still put up our walls and we do not start with the patient, we're all going to sit here and talk about technology still, and we're still not addressing the human-centered approach.
Another 20 years.
Can I say I agree? Like, I mean,
Yeah, so you come from Verizon, so
And Marianne.
and they're just thinking. When you look at Verizon, I'm a Verizon customer. I've been a Verizon customer for the past 25 years. I will not change. I've been a member for Costco for years, and I will not change. I've got an Amazon subscription Prime. I will not change. But my healthcare freaking provider, I will change. Why? Why? Because when you said what you just said was something that I don't know if you said it in a way that you really meant it. When Verizon puts a bill out together, they had to figure out when a customer gets it, what does this really mean, and what is it that I'm doing?
I did mean it like that.
So have we ever thought through that? Verizon thinks that way because they want to keep the customer.
Correct. That's right.
So if I drive the fact that I want to keep that customer every day, then I will do that kind of stuff. But that's not the intent we have in healthcare. We are, for whatever lack of term, physicians in the room, we are this big system. You got to come to us. You have to come and see us. And I'm going to block my schedule for the next 20 years. So I won't allow another patient to see me till I allow him to see me, right? I mean, that's our today's environment.
So so what you're saying is really speaking exactly to what I was sharing as mindset. In some ways, it's a start of questioning decisions that you start, or a mindset you might have that you start approaching it. Like a health system in a community can actually start thinking consumer driven, but it puts tension and pressure on the system for all of the clinical work that needs to be done and the volume that already comes into the system. Like in many cases, you have more than enough business in certain areas that you're trying to really optimize. It's really making sure you don't miss the next generation of patients who are effectively, put it in this context, as in financial services, like, when I was coming up in that space or launching mobile wallets, like I was told by the bankers, like regulation, authentication, all this stuff you have to meet. 10 years later, Venmo, Stripe, all these guys have fundamentally disrupted that whole space. It was because all of that was built off of tech that started to become a little more accessible and transparent in terms of data that you could pull out, that the developers went after it saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to focus on the end user of this stuff. I don't care what else is in the middle of it. And they forced the conversation, and that's a moment in time that COVID is forcing on the industry, that give it 3 years, some of these next gen disruptors that are digital first going over the top are going to force the conversation a little bit. And that's something that health systems can address sooner than maybe they would feel comfortable doing. But I think that dynamic is going to be brought closer to healthcare because of a seminal moment like COVID that forced a little bit of a reckoning, not fully, but just opening the door to the possibility that somebody from a consumer-driven lens could come in and reframe the conversation.
Yeah, and I think going back to the points you both made, why isn't there consumer-driven tech? And I would argue that there has been an increase, maybe not in the way you see, but we talked a little bit about HIMSS, HERS, Roman, and for a long time, especially in digital health, it was don't expect the consumer to pay, right? And we're seeing trends, especially during COVID, of consumer willingness to pay outside of their health plan benefit. Hey, I'm willing to buy my own Fitbit and track my exercise data. Maybe I'll choose to share that or not. I don't know where some of those connections start to get made. The age tech market is exploding. That is a consumer market. Those are individuals buying that to be healthier in their homes today. Where are the provider systems? Where are the doctors in connecting into that home experience as well? So I'm optimistic in a sense, but I 100% agree with you. It takes, the stakeholders in the system, their willingness to play into that ecosystem. And so, at least, like what we think about both the demand side and the supply side. So working, with traditional stakeholders of care, but also how do you build out the supply side of, evangelist users that are, doing health in their home already and willing to pay for some of that convenience that doesn't generate a claim and isn't something that is necessarily in the EHR or the personal health record today.
Yeah, and one last little thought starter. I, as a person, don't want to manage my clinical record. I want to manage my health. And the clinical record may help me do that, especially if I go through some heavy stuff that requires a lot of that data. But I really just want to manage my health. And that's a different thought process of me approaching it than the way sometimes it's thought of to solve different kinds of problems. And that's something I leave you with to think about, of like, how can you push towards helping people manage their health in context of like, they came to you probably for some heavy stuff and they're going to have to get through that and then to the next step. Right.
Well, this has been a wonderful discussion. I want to thank you all for coming. Thank you to our panelists for participating. As a reminder, you should have received a feedback survey. So you can either leave that in your chair or hand it to Doug, standing in the back of the room. Thank you all so much. We hope you have enjoyed this discussion.
Thank you.